Say what you will about the man, and there is a lot that you can say. Dr. Seuss is probably one of, if not the most popular and the best children's book author, really ever. His books manage to mix colorful language with colorful pictures that tell very good lessons. Now, this is my childhood Dr. Seuss book, and we're not going to be talking about all 6 of these books today. I just figured that I wanted to bring this one out, because this one is the one that is special to me. And the story that we're talking about is special to me as well. It's what is probably considered his best story, also considered his darkest. Today, we're talking about the Lorax. Now, the Lorax is my favorite of Dr. Seuss's books. It's also one of his best. It manages to tell such an amazing story that has lasted and somehow gotten more relevant as time has gone on. And the book ends with a quote that has stuck with me in the however long it's been since I first read that book. This, of course, is the unless quote, which we will be getting to, but for now, I think a summary is in order, which does require us to go to the wall. But if you haven't read this book in a while, or if for some reason you've never read this book, please go read it. It absolutely holds up, even after about 50 years of it being published. It's worth it. Just go back for the nostalgia's sake, if nothing else. But for those of you that don't want to listen to me and go reread this masterpiece, let's go to the wall. Now, I know what you're thinking. Do I really need to do like a summary and a recap of The Lorax by Dr. Seuss, one of the most well-known and popular books ever, that has 2 movie adaptations that both do adapt the story well enough to where you'd be able to get a summary out of it? Well, we open with an unnamed kid. He's currently on the street of the lifted Lorax. Everything around him is polluted and smoggy and gross. Currently, he's going to the house of the Onceler because he's trying to look for information on who or what the Lorax is. And so he goes to the Onceler's house and is able to pay, interesting, to get information on who the Lorax is. And so the Onceler starts his story. So the Onceler starts telling his story. Long ago, the Onceler was a much younger man. He came to this land, and it was filled with all sorts of wonderful trees called truffula trees. But that wasn't all it was filled of. Bears called barbaloots, hummingfish, and something called a swami swan. And so, the Onceler, seeing this bountiful land with all these trees ripe for harvesting, builds a small shop and chops one down to make something called a thneed. Out of the stump of this tree that he cut down pops the Lorax. So the Lorax pops out of the stump and goes over to the Onceler. He gives him the whole, I'm the Lorax, I speak for the trees have no tongues, blah, blah, you know the thing. And he basically asks him, why'd you cut down this tree? And the Onceler responds with, well, I needed to make a thneed. A thneed's to find something that everyone needs. The Lorax thinks that this is a stupid invention that no one's ever going to buy, and so someone immediately shows up and buys it. He still tries to plead with the Onceler, asking him, please, please, don't continue chopping down these trees. But the Onceler ignores him and calls all of his relatives so that they can start building a bigger business, and so that business can grow. And it does. Industrialization happens. Everything's going really great. Business is booming. And the Onceler has sort of stopped coming around. That is, until the barbaloots are threatened. See, the barbaloots survive mostly on the truffula fruits, and because the Onceler is chopping down all these trees, they're struggling to find food. The Lorax has to send off all of the barbaloots in hopes of finding a better place to live with more food. The Onceler is sad, but business is business, and business must grow. It has to bigger, and so bigger is what he did. He biggered his factories, his business, everything, especially his money, because money is a fine thing that everyone needs. Things are going pretty well, but the barbaloots, they're gone. But then the Lorax comes back again. He tells the Onceler that the smog from the factories has gotten so bad that the Swami Swans frankly can't survive here anymore. They have to go off. In fact, the Lorax says that they may have to fly for a month or a year just to find somewhere that is safe for them to live. So, the Swami Swans are gone too. But before the Once-There can respond, the Lorax takes him by the arm and drags him down to the waste pipes that are being dumped into the ocean. The hummingfish can't survive here either. So, the Lorax sends them off to try to find cleaner water. They're gone too. This makes the Once-There mad, not because he's actually worried about any of the lives of the animals that he's jeopardized, but because the Lorax is trying to stop his business. The Once-There's doing good. He's just got a bigger. It's important. He's doing good, and he's not going to stop anytime soon. So yeah, he yells at the Lorax. But that moment where he yells at the Lorax, they hear a thwack of the last truffula tree falling down. It's all over. The business can't continue. There are no more trees to harvest. So, immediately, the Once-There's family leaves. All of his employees, they leave. All that's left is just the Once-There and the Lorax. But then the Lorax gives the Once-There a sad glance. And he lifts himself up into a hole in the smog. And he leaves. All that's left is the Once-There. And a small pile of rocks with one word. Unless. What that means, Once-There has no idea. Then he says, now that you're here, the word of the Lorax seems perfectly clear. Unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's not. But the book doesn't end there. You turn the page, and the Once-There drops a seed to the boy. Tells him to protect it. Tells him that it's the last truffula seed. And that hopefully, if he can protect this seed, the Lorax and all his friends can come back. And that's the book. It's pretty short. I mean, it's a children's book after all. But it's really, really profound, especially that ending. So that's it. What I consider to be Dr. Seuss's best book. And what many people consider to be his darkest book. But let's talk about that for a second, because I've never seen it that way. I mean, I do, I understand, but to me it's a message of hope. I understand that the message has been likened to, hey kid, I screwed up so bad that there's a hope that you could fix things, but that's all we really have, is a hope. But to me, the fact that there is a hope is beautiful. But let's talk about it, specifically that unless message, because this book has been considered by many to be Dr. Seuss's darkest book, and in ways, it is. The message is basically just, hey kid, unless you do something, things are going to get worse, and they're already bad. And don't get me wrong, I see that, I understand that, and it's true, in a way. Yes, the message is kind of dark. But, and you can call me an optimist, the fact that there is hope means that it's hopeful to me. The fact that things aren't over, the fact that, in the end, we don't know what happens to this boy. And the open-endedness, the fact that it leaves on the note of maybe the Lorax and his friends can come back, well, it makes me want to think that they do, eventually. To me, it's saying, it's going to be hard, things are bad, but you can do this. I believe in you. And the seed is really like the crux of this, because without the seed, the unless statement is just like vague hope. There's no real basis for it, but the seed gives it reason, gives you reason to hope, gives you reason to believe that there is a chance for this boy to do something, to protect these trees, right? It's important to me that the quote is, unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, things are not going to get better, it's not. So catch. This is the last, this is the last truffula seed. Protect it. That's the important part to me. He doesn't end with things aren't going to get better. It's not. He ends with the Lorax could come back because of this seed. And especially when looking at how far things have gone, to just flip back a couple pages of the book and look at how things were at the start and how things were at the end, it seems hopeless. The better in question, well, you're just retreading ground that the Onceler has already gone down. You're just undoing things that the Onceler has done. The better in question, if things get better, they may not even be as good as they once were. But for the boy, he hasn't seen the beauty of what was. He only sees how things are. He's never seen a barbaloot or a swami swan or a hummingfish. The idea that any one could return is significant to him. That's progress. And that's why I think this is really much more hopeful than people give it credit for. Don't get me wrong, it is dark. Things are bad. The situation that this boy is in is not good. But he can make it better. Right? You can call me an optimist, but I just find this book so hopeful, so beautiful. And that's really the reason why this quote has stuck with me for so long. But I've gone down a huge rabbit hole. Let's refocus, let's move on. Here's the thing about this book. As far as I'm concerned, it doesn't really have characters. I mean, it kind of does, yeah. You have the boy, the Onceler, and the Lorax. But none of those are really characters. The only one that really has any sort of change is the Onceler. To me, they're all really just symbols. This boy is pretty much just a blank face for the audience to sympathize with. The Onceler is the polluter, and the Lorax is the voice of nature. These are symbols. They're not people. But you can, at least with the Lorax, look at him as a character. And I do find that interesting, although personally it's not my ultimate interpretation of the book. To me, looking at the Onceler as a character instead of a symbol is most interesting when you ask the questions, why did he change his mind? And when did he change his mind? Because let's be clear, he did, right? He was so into polluting back in the day, and yet he gave the boy the seed. So what caused this change, and when did it happen? The obvious answer is that either he changed immediately after the Lorax left, or in the years following, right? Because we see that as soon as that tree is cut down, things changed. As soon as that tree is cut down, he's left. He's alone to reflect. And so the years of quiet contemplation, or maybe just the stone itself, were able to help him find that realization. But that's not satisfying to me. And there's really two reasons why this isn't satisfying for me. Number one is, he makes the kid pay for the story. On the end of a rope, he lets down a tin pail, and you have to toss in 15 cents and a nail and the shell of a great-great-great-grandfather snail. Why would he do this? Well, maybe he's testing them. Maybe he's testing the boy. But it doesn't really give off that impression to me. It really seems like he's greedy, and that's because of the next line. Then he pulls up the pail and makes most careful count to see if you've paid him the proper amount. Yes, this could be a thing where he's just testing, making sure that this is the person that he wants to give the seed to or whatever. But that's not what it sounds like. This sounds like he needs it. What does he give him? Well, 15 cents and a nail. Those, to me, seem like things that he just needs. He's greedy. We know this from the past. And nails, I mean, he's living alone. He doesn't go to the store or anything, so a nail seems like something useful. Maybe he just, he needs a nail to nail something in. I don't know. But the shell of a great-great-grandfather snail seems to go against this. And it may, but my explanation for that is simply that, I don't know, he's got all sorts of weird inventions. The whispermophone, I mean, the house itself is, all weird and wild. We don't know what's in his house. We don't know what kind of guy he is. He might need that shell for an invention. He might need that shell for something. I don't know. But the first two definitely seem like things that he practically needs. And he clearly makes careful count. He needs to make sure that everything is in order before he tells this kid anything. To me, this seems like he's just trying to, make some money, get some things that he needs in exchange for a story that he's willing to tell. And the second thing is the seed. Why, if he would have changed before, whether because of the unless statement or because of the years of growth that he went over, why did he not plant the seed himself? He had the opportunity and the means and motive, if you subscribe to the idea that he changed in the meantime. So why not? Why not? Why would he wait? Why would he wait for this kid to do it for him? He knows he can do it. Trees take a while to grow. He could at the very least start it and trust the tree to someone else eventually. But he doesn't. Now, there could be an explanation to this, and I think it is interesting, but I disagree with it. It's the idea that the Onceler, out of guilt, basically just didn't think he was worthy of planting the seed. He wanted to entrust it to someone who deserved it. But I disagree. That's possible, but I simply like the alternative better. And the alternative is that he changed during the conversation with the child. We don't really see their conversation, but is the idea that at some point they would have had a conversation and it wouldn't just be the Onceler telling the boy things? Is that so far out of the realm of possibility? Because I don't think so. And I think the idea that the Onceler, in seeing this kid who had a genuine interest in trees and the Lorax and all of this, that's what changed. That seeing this kid gave him hope for the future. Because remember what he said. He doesn't say, oh, well, I got what unless meant immediately. He doesn't say that. He says, what that meant, I couldn't guess. Then he says, now that you're here, the words of the Lorax seem pretty clear. Unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing's going to get better. It's not. I think that for years in seclusion, the Onceler didn't care about the seed, didn't care about anything. He was just salty that he lost everything. But then this kid comes by, and he changes everything. And I think that that's such an interesting idea. The idea that the Onceler was changed because of this kid. That this kid was special in a way. Because he does say, unless someone like you. But ultimately, though, I don't believe that this is really what the story's about. I don't believe that these are characters. I believe that these are ideas, that these are symbols, that this is us. This is whatever child has read this and whoever else reads this over time. We are the one that can change things if we care enough. And this is the person that destroyed the world. But in their old age, they can't do anything. So it's up to us. And the Lorax? Well, he's just, like your conscious, I guess, the words of nature. I mean, you could argue he's activists, that activists are the ones that speak for the trees. But I like it. I like the idea much more that he's more of a conscience figure, that he's the angel on the Onceler's shoulder. So he doesn't try to pretend that he doesn't know what he's doing. He tries completely different approaches. The first, he just ignores it. He brushes it off. Oh, it's fine. It's just one tree. When the Barbaloots have to leave, they have to go somewhere else. The Onceler says this. I, the Onceler, felt sad as I watched them all go, but business is business, and business must grow, regardless of crummies and tummies, I meant no harm, I most truly did not, but I had to grow bigger, so bigger I got. I biggered my factory, I biggered my roads, I biggered my wagons, I biggered the loads. Of the needs I shipped out, I was shipping them forth, to the south, to the east, to the west, to the north. I went right on biggering, selling more needs, and I biggered my money, which everyone needs. I think it's important that he ends on money, as if all of these things he's using as excuses before the real reason comes to the surface. He wants money. Then, the humming fish and the swami swans. He gets mad. He yells at the Lorax, telling him that he has his rights, and he's going to continue doing what he wants because that's his right. And then, he ends by saying that a need is to find something that everyone needs. He starts by brushing off the Lorax, by telling him to shut up and that it isn't important. Then, he makes excuses. But finally, he gets mad, and he shows his true colors. This is selfish, what he's doing. But, in that, he has a burst of trying to be perceived as selfless. Well, Eth needs to find something that everyone needs. So, this is good. This is good. It is selfish, but as long as he can end with, I'm doing something that everyone needs, he doesn't have to think about the repercussions of his actions. The Onceler is a warning to us of what to look for and what to look out for. Not to accept when they brush us off. Not to accept their bad excuses and not to submit to their false righteousness, their proclaimed selflessness. In the end, Seuss is saying that companies can pretend to be just like us. They can pretend to be noble. But in the end, the Onceler has no face. The Onceler is not a person. He's a corporation. And a corporation has one goal: to bigger. But where does the Lorax fit into this? I said earlier that you could view him as activist, you could view him as a force of nature, you could view him as a conscious. Those are the options that I see. Of course, this and with anything else in this video, there are probably very many other options that I'm just not seeing. And if you have other ideas, please let me know. Especially with this one, because I am torn. I do find, as I said earlier, the idea of him being a conscience to be the most interesting. But that doesn't really fit with the idea of this not being a person, this being a corporation. But I find it interesting, the idea that the Onceler knows what he's doing innately, and there's a bit that's left in him. A bit of humanity in corporations, because corporations are made up of humans, although corporations themselves are not human. But I'm not entirely sold on anything with the Lorax, as far as my interpretation is concerned. I just haven't decided. If you have ideas, please let me know. I'd love to read them in the comments. On the other side, could be a force of nature. I mean, that's certainly what he is on face value. I'm the Lorax. I speak for the trees. I also speak for the barbaloots, the swami swans, and the humming fish. Right? He is, at least at very face level, he is the voice of nature. He's the one that speaks for all these trees and animals that can't speak for themselves. But another option is that he's an activist. That Seuss is kind of telling us that we are meant to be the Lorax, that we're meant to be the ones that are forcing these corporations, these companies, to make sure that they cannot claim ignorance, that they know what they're doing, and try to help nature in any way that we can. And to a certain degree, I do think that that's interesting, but I also think we're meant to be the boy. So, looking at it that way kind of makes things a little weird. I don't really have a lot to say about us being the activists. It's just another option that I see. But ultimately, it just doesn't really mesh with us being the boy. I mean, the true answer is that this is a children's story and I'm reading too much into it, but I find that answer utterly unsatisfying. And so I'd like to hear what you have to say. If you have another option, or if you think that any of these three options is particularly truthful as to what you think is the point of this story, please put it down in the comments. I'd love to hear it. And the last thing I want to talk about in this section is the art. Dr. Seuss is an amazing artist, an amazing illustrator. All of his books are filled with colorful and beautiful drawings that tell the story just as well as his poetry. And I especially like what he does in this book. I like the use of colors, the way that things gradually get darker over time, And I like the fact that we never see anyone's face except for the Lorax and the boy, as if these are the only real ones that we're meant to have any sort of connection to. Outside of that, these are not characters, these are not people. But this is far outside of my sphere of knowledge and what I'm comfortable in. I don't know anything about visual storytelling, I don't know anything about art, color theory, all of that. If you know anything, please put it down in the comments, and I'd love to read just what you have to say about how Dr. Seuss uses the pictures in this story, because I think there is something there. I just don't know how to put it. I'll pin it or something, I don't know. But that's really all I have for you guys today. So, with that, I say we go to the shelf. But now, let's talk about where I found God in this story. Now, if that doesn't interest you, feel free to click off. I leave this for the end so I can respect your beliefs and your time, in case you don't want to hear about God when you clicked on a Lorax video. Now, for such a short book, there was actually a lot that I could talk about here. I mean, I thought about potentially using the unless statement as a bit of a comparison to the Great Commission, the way that it's a very specific statement towards someone about how you need to do something. You need to, change the world and plant more trees, or you need to go out and make disciples and baptize nations. Additionally, I thought about talking about how, based on my belief that the Onceler changed because of his interactions with the child over the course of this book, that kind of points to what Jesus said a lot of the time about how, in order to inherit the kingdom of God, you have to be like a little child. But ultimately, I decided that I really wanted to get into the Onceler's character, and not how he was fixed, how he changed, but his response while he was still greedy, while he was still chopping down all those trees. The Onceler is someone that's always making constant excuses whenever the Lorax comes and tries to tell him to stop what he's doing. When he's polluting the water, or chopping down the trees, or polluting the air, it doesn't matter because he simply has to get more money. He simply has to grow his business. He's not willing to hear what the Lorax is saying. And that idea of not being able to listen, right? Hearing but not listening, hearing but ignoring completely what you're being told, is very similar to an idea that we get in the Old Testament, in the book of Exodus, with Pharaoh. So, a bit of background, in the book of Exodus, the Israelites are enslaved in Egypt. If you've watched The Prince of Egypt, you know the story. But God doesn't want the Israelites to remain enslaved forever, so he has a plan. He takes Moses, and he tells him to go talk to Pharaoh. Basically just, hey, let my people go. In the name of God, let my people go. But Pharaoh refused, and we get this verse a couple times, it's repeated all throughout this story, where it says that Pharaoh hardened his own heart, and he would not listen to them, just as the Lord had said. Now again, this does repeat several different times, but what's happening here is Pharaoh's being stubborn. He refuses to let the Israelites go. And what's interesting about the Onceler is we see this very similar idea in him. Although he sees things falling apart around him, he sees all of the animals have to leave, he doesn't care, because he's greedy. He's after what's in his best interest for him, and not what actually is good. And what's interesting is you never see the Lorax try the same thing again. First, he starts and he speaks for the trees. And then he speaks for the barbaloots, then the swami swans, and the humming fish. In all of those examples, that is the first time and the last that he is pleading to the Onceler in that way, because he knows that he's not gonna be heard again. After the Onceler blows him off, he knows that he's not gonna be able to reach him in that way. And in the same way, Pharaoh repeatedly blows off God. He blows off what God's telling him. God's telling him, let the Israelites go. And he doesn't. What does the Lorax do? He tries and he tries and he tries again. But the final tree is chopped down. The final humming fish leaves, the final swami swan leaves, the final barbaloot leaves. The Onceler did not listen to him. He was too stubborn. So he leaves. In the story of the Pharaoh, this is similar to when it says that God hardened Pharaoh's heart. That wasn't God messing with Pharaoh's free will. That wasn't God making the decision for him. That was God letting Pharaoh continue to be stubborn because he wasn't being listened to. And in the same way, the Lorax never physically tries to stop the Onceler. But when it's too late, he goes. But the Onceler story ends in hope. Hope that the Lorax could come back. Now, if this was a one-to-one metaphor for God, the changing of the Onceler's heart would mean that the Lorax came back. But the Lorax isn't God. It wasn't too late for the Onceler, though. And in the end, at least according to my interpretation, he just needed a little help from the younger generation. But that's all I have for you today. If you liked the video, I would really appreciate it if you liked and subscribed. It really helps me out. But that's all I have for you today. I pray that each of you has a blessed day. And remember, now listen here, Dad. All you do is yap yap and say bad, 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 bad. Yeah, I got him. No!